Hello and welcome to The Real Conspiracy News, a weekly show where I scour the internet for this past week's conspiracy news and bring it to you, the viewer, in digestible bite-sized chunks. So without further ado, let's go down the rabbit hole. Now, the first topic is likely to probably pick the scab of a very sore wound. However, I must discuss a very old conspiracy that's just reared its ugly head and thrust itself back into the limelight. And that theory is, did Hitler have Jewish blood? In a recent interview on Italian TV, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that German dictator Adolf Hitler had Jewish blood in an effort to justify Moscow's call to denazify Ukraine. Lavrov said that, so what if Zelensky is Jewish? The fact does not negate the Nazi element in Ukraine. I believe that Hitler had Jewish blood. Some of the worst anti-Semites are Jews. Now, completely understandably, this has caused huge outrage and condemnation, with Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. He called the remarks unforgivable, scandalous, and a terrible historical mistake. The Jews did not murder themselves in the Holocaust. The lowest level of racism against the Jews is to blame the Jews themselves for anti-Semitism. So, got to ask the question, where did this whole conspiracy that Hitler had Jewish blood come from? We have to go back to 1837. Hitler's grandmother, Maria Schicklgruber, gave birth to Hitler's father, Alois. Maria was unmarried and refused to give the name of Alois's father, so was baptised Alois Schicklgruber. There are several men who historians think could be the father. One of them was a German man named Johann Georg Heidler, who later married Maria and was later added to the birth certificate, and the Nazi Germans accepted him as a father. But there was another man, a Jewish man, named Leopold Frankenberger, who was named by ex-Nazi Hans Frank during the Nuremberg trial that he was Hitler's father. Now, Hans Frank was Adolf Hitler's personal attorney. This is the same man that historian Dr. Leonard Sachs also claims is Hitler's father. Now, Dr. Leonard Sachs presented evidence in the Journal of the European Studies that Maria Schicklgruber conceived her only child with a Jewish man living in Graz, Austria. It was assumed that no Jewish community existed in Graz before 1856, and this assumption was mainly down to historian Nicholas von Preradovic, who made the claim. However, Dr. Sachs showed that there was a Jewish community living in Graz before this, and that Preradovic was a Nazi sympathiser who hated the idea that Hitler could have a Jewish lineage. Now, the History Channel also ran a story in 2010, which was updated in 2018, stating that a study suggested Hitler had Jewish and African ancestors. Belgian journalist Jean-Paul Mulders teamed up with another historian called Mark Vermeeren. They collected saliva samples of 39 of Hitler's living relatives. Writing in Knack magazine in 2010, they said, looking at the haplogroups, which are sets of chromosomes that geneticists use to define specific populations, they found that the relative's most dominant haplogroup is rare in Western Europeans, but is common among North Africans, particularly the Berber tribes of Morocco, Algerian, Libyan and Tunisia. It's also one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population, present in 18 to 20% of the Ashkenazi Jews and between 8.6 to 30% of the Sephardic Jews. So in other words, Hitler's family tree may have included Jewish and African ancestors. Since the publication of the Knack article on the August 18, 2010, academics have been quick to point out that this does not necessarily mean the man who inspired the Holocaust was either Jewish, African, or a combination of either. The haplogroup runs in other ethnic groups, for instance, and DNA analysis remains an inexact science. The conspiracy isn't likely to find a resolution. No guarantees can be given either way. But looking at the available evidence, it's impossible to say with any certainty. The only known body parts available from Adolf Hitler himself are his jawbone and skull fragments. Now, that's a completely different conspiracy that's open to interpretation, and we will discuss that on another time regarding, is the skull bone his? However, I don't know if it's usable to be able to complete any kind of DNA analysis. The second conspiracy that came up this week was one from Oliver Stone, the famous movie director. He's posted a fascinating tweet that sounds like the plot of a movie. On screen is his tweet. In the opening 2 paragraphs of his tweet, he gives a condensed overview of issues that have occurred over the last 8 years, many of which barely got a mention or any real coverage. What he'd said to that point was there's been multiple conspiracies of things that, in his opinion, have already happened. But it's the next part of the tweet about a conspiracy of things to come that's what got my interest. He sets the scene that it's possible that the USA could set off a low-yield nuclear explosion in Ukraine, then point the guilty finger squarely at Putin, thus making Russia, on a global scale, the devil of recent times. You can imagine the propaganda machine of the media would lay it on thick and fast, and regardless of the truth, Russia would be guilty. This, according to Stone, would usher in, hopefully, a new Yeltsin-type figure to come into power and offer huge business opportunities to America. Because Yeltsin oversaw the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 and ultimately oversaw a radical economic reform and privatisation. So another leader like Yeltsin would offer massive advantages and great benefits to America. Another positive would be that Russia would be isolated from China, who could not publicly support a nation who is willing to nuke its own citizens. He does say, as a cautionary tale, that after Russia, China will be the next one to be conquered. Now, for anybody thinking that this is outside the realms of possibility, I'm afraid history is not on your side. America has a history of false flags. An example could be the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. On August 2nd, 1964, the USS Maddox was attacked by a Vietnamese torpedo boat. Then President Johnson, on August 4th, said it was attacked again, but it hadn't. After the second attack, the US Congress passed a resolution almost unanimously allowing the federal government to take all necessary measures to protect US forces in Vietnam. Vietnam started on a falsity. In 1991, does anybody remember Desert Storm and the daughter of the Kuwaiti US ambassador who played nurse on TV and testified to witnessing Iraqi soldiers throwing babies out of incubators? This was one of the big key moments that started the first Gulf War. And then in the second Gulf War, does anybody remember weapons of mass destruction? There was one false flag that didn't quite get off the ground, but is well documented. In 1962, there was Operation Northwood, the proposed false flag where the CIA proposed attacking American and civilian targets and blaming it on the Cubans. Ultimately, this was rejected, but it was certainly proposed. If it benefits the war machine, then this particular conspiracy could have legs. It's also important to note that Oliver Stone has spent personal time with Putin. In 2017, when he produced the Putin interviews, so he does have first-hand accounts of dealing with Putin. Additionally, on the 1st of May, Congressman Adam Kinzinger announced his introduction of a joint resolution that would authorise the use of US armed forces to defend the territory integrity of the Ukraine in the event that Putin escalates his unjust war, in the scenario that he would use chemical, biological or nuclear weapons against the Ukraine. Now, I believe this will be the stance of any country, regardless of this resolution. Using biological weapons against your own countrymen typically is frowned upon. This, of course, could all be mere coincidence, as coincidences do happen. But should what Oliver Stone said come true, then you'd better believe Russia is getting some good old-fashioned American freedom. The third conspiracy I want to speak about today is one that I saw over many news articles, and it really piqued my interest, and that was that NASA shut down the HelioViewer live cam after a conspiracy theorist claimed he saw a cube coming out of the sun. Now, a mystery black cube had been seen momentarily coming out of the sun before NASA's website had technical issues and cut the live feed. Scott Waring, a self-described ET specialist who's got UFO sightings daily and a YouTube channel, stated that NASA covered up the specific region of the sun and shut down the website for maintenance as soon as a black cube appeared. Now, a small cubic-shaped object does emerge for about 2 seconds on the bottom right corner of the sun, as shown on the film from the Soho Observatory. The video comes to an abrupt stop and the screen goes black.
This is just amazing, and it's kind of mind-blowing. Now look at that. Did you see the cube coming out? There is a cube on the right side coming out of the sun, and right after that frame, a big glitch that covers 25%. Watch, there it is, gone, glitch. Did you see that? Okay, watch it again. It covers, here it comes. 2 frames of the cube coming out of the sun, and then a huge glitch. 1, 2, glitch. Did you see that?
So I wanted to see whether this was true or not. So I went onto the NASA Soho site to try and recreate the video. The Soho EIT-284, from where the video was taken, is used to view the sun's corona and solar winds. So the video attached is a stitch together of a single image taken every 12 hours. And when I wanted to view the images, mine didn't glitch. As you can clearly see on screen, these are the same images in the viral video. And unfortunately, it's not a Borg craft exiting the sun. It's either a case of sensationalism, a genuine glitch at the time that Waring was producing his video, as there was scheduled downtime that day, or maybe it's pareidolia. But the unfortunate truth is, it's nothing more than a solar flare. You can see the cube dissipate. It doesn't prove at all, unfortunately, that NASA and Soho are complicit in a cover-up. Number 4, the one I want to talk about now, is the Centre of Disease Control bought Americans' data to enforce a lockdown. That's right, the CDC, for the paltry sum of $420,000, purchased 1 year's worth of mobile phone location data from a company called SafeGraph. Tens of millions of mobile phones were tracked during COVID to track the movement and patterns of people. The data was aggregated, meaning that it was intended to show only general trends rather than the movements of specific phones. Some of those intended patterns were checking on people going to school, churches, mass gatherings, border tracking. It's only marginally worse than the UK's NHS Test and Trace, which went live and hadn't even been risk assessed on how the data would be used. Interestingly, SafeGraph were banned from Google Play Store last year for this exact reason, for selling data for COVID tracking. And at the time it was all alleged, but now, with the Freedom of Information request, it's seemingly proven. If that wasn't bad enough, the Freedom of Information request also showed that the CDC had some other ideas for the data. The documents contain a long list of what the CDC describes as 21 different potential CDC use cases for data. They include track patterns of those visiting schools by the school compared to 2019 and compare it with the Environmental Performance Index, examination of the correlation of mobility pattern data and the rise in COVID-19 cases, movement restrictions such as border closures, interregional night curfews to show compliance, examination of the effectiveness of a public policy on the Navajo Nation. Some of the use cases aren't even explicitly linked to COVID-19 pandemic. One reads, research points of interest for physical activity and chronic disease prevention such as visits to parks, gyms or weight management businesses. The CDC also plans to use mobility data and services acquired through this acquisition to support non-COVID-19 programmatic areas and public health priorities across the agency, including but not limited to travels to parks and green spaces, physical activity, mode of travel, population migration before, during and after natural disasters. It continues to read, mobility data under this contract will be available for CDC agency-wide use and will support numerous CDC priorities. The other issue is, whilst the data was anonymised, it can be de-anonymised, which doesn't mean having to crack the data given, but you can use it with other known data of the area, and you can identify individual people just from small touch points. There are countless case studies showing the weaknesses of anonymisation. And just as I talked about in the last episode about biometric data, this is just another version of how safe is our data. When organisations can purchase anything they want about any one of us and use it for whatever means they want, is there any limit to what data can be used for against its people? What the COVID pandemic has shown is that data about you can be weaponized. Most of the time we give up data and we have no real idea of how it's being used, stored or sold. Conspiracy 5 I want to talk about today it's quite a fun one. However, the headline reads, UFO expert believes seagulls, the most hated birds on earth, are actually alien spies. Quite the sensationalist headline, as a good newspaper should. It needs to sell its newspapers. But often, a quote can be given and taken out of context. But that was the headline I was visited with today online. Now, when I read it, the content doesn't quite match the clickbait. For those of you who don't know Nick Pope, and I'm not talking about the Burnley FC goalkeeper, he used to work for the British Ministry of Defence, MOD, up until 2006. And whilst at the MOD, from about 91 to 94, right in the middle of the X-Files, he worked for the UFO desk, where he was responsible for investigating reports of UFO sightings to see if any had any defence significance. Since leaving the MOD, he's been a very vocal advocate of the UFOs and is a huge believer in the British Roswell, the Rendlesham Forest incident. Now, fast forward to 2022, Pope has been quoted in many publications talking about aliens. And what his quote in the papers was saying today is, if aliens want to hack into and control a living organism or construct a drone that's a perfect mimic, it would be best to choose something ordinary and ubiquitous like a seagull or a housefly. Something you wouldn't normally pay attention to, perhaps. But all of the time, it will be spying on us, recording everything and sending information back to its alien homeworld. If aliens are secretly monitoring Earth, they'll be doing it up close and personal, not with distant telescopes, but a way that will enable them to get crystal clear images and recordings right under our noses. I've always said, if we take the human race and manage to not obliterate ourselves in the next 10,000 years, imagine the advancements of technology that we'd be able to create. It would be absolutely astonishing. Our imagination today could probably not even envision what we'd be able to create. So knowing that, what I doubt is aliens would need to hijack a seagull or a cockroach or a fly. Especially when we've already seen in this video already, our tech is already adequate enough to do the surveillance for them. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's only been my second attempt. If you came back from last week, again, thank you very much. Any new viewers, thank you very much. And I will be back next week with a brand new video. And I've hoped you've enjoyed going down the rabbit hole with me. And I'll see you again soon.